we're going to address, okay, Romans 13, what does this look like in terms of authorities? So Romans 13, 1-5, we've already read it, but I want to look at it again. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. Now, we really need to understand this. Whenever Scripture talks about authority, it's from God. And I'm going to suggest to you that in the context of this passage, this is talking about civil government. This is not talking about church government. And you're going to see why in a moment. But this is talking about a system of government, of legitimate spiritual authority. That's what this passage is referring to. A whole system of authority that only comes from God. The enemy can only operate in power and control. So if someone does not operate according to heaven's definition of authority, they have none, and they are only exercising power and control. Okay, so there's a difference here. If we go further in this passage, we're going to see the qualifiers for what makes this God's authority. So picking up, I think verse 2 or 3, it says, "For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good." This is God's definition of authority. Is anyone who operates in it is a servant for good, for your good, for my good. "But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is a servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer." This is why you know this is not a qualification for a pastor. I don't think any one of us would want a pastor who is an avenger who carries out God's wrath on a wrongdoer. This is specifically talking about civil government and God's qualifications for anyone in that government that wants to operate in authority, not power and control. Are you tracking with me? Because this is very important, because if we take just at reading that we're supposed to submit to authority, well, God has set them in place, that's saying anybody that's voted in, God put there. That's not true. The fact is, you and I put them there because of our vote. But God's authority will only rest on those who meet the qualifications for heaven's authority. Now, the other passage that goes along with this is 1 Peter 2, 13 and 14. And here again it says, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether it be to the emperor, which is king, as supreme, or to governors as sent by him, to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good." This is the qualifier for who God has sent. They punish those who do evil and they praise those who do good. Okay? So to me, when I read this, it doesn't mean that just anybody that's elected into office, well, then we've got to submit because, and I'm going two different trains here. They have to have a qualification in terms of operating in God's authority. We can tell if they are the kinds of rulers who punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. So, if I look at this, I'm looking, okay, as a Christian now, how are we going to apply this then? Because would that say, well, I deem that this ruler, this governor, this president, whatever, is not punishing the evildoer and praising the good, therefore I don't have to submit. But see, here's the problem. We voted for them. Or we allowed by default because the collective church did not rise up and take a stand. We bear responsibility for it. And so spiritually, we are subject because it was our choice. It was because of our decision or lack of decision. This is the reality of why we have to take ownership in the governing authorities as the church. It has huge spiritual ramifications. But hopefully what I'm want to remove is this knee-jerk reaction that we automatically have to submit because they're an authority. Now, please hear me. I'm not suggesting we throw it to the wind and we all go on our own way and thinking, well, I don't like them, so I'm not going to submit to them. Okay, this is why I'm opening a can of worms, okay? But I'm wanting to stir our thinking that we look at it a little differently and ask some different questions.